My dear friends, we have here the essence. I would like to pause for a moment on this expression, love with all thy mind. Look at your mind. What is filling it at this point in time? When you go from here, what will fill it in the course of the day? It is not indifferent, my friends, if we allow someone else to live in our mind, especially if that person is not in a state of grace, and if we allow his mind, even through electronic means, to influence ours through osmosis. We cannot be in a state of divine love and of exposing ourselves to what is belonging to the sphere of his enemy. I would ask each of you here, in the course of this Sunday, which is the weekly retreat in the program of Almighty God, to make an examination of conscience on the amount of intimacy in your day. I mean on the vertical hold. Our life depends on our bond of mental and affective union with him. If we do not feel and sense the urgent desire to drift towards the tabernacle as towards a magnet, it is an indication that we're not in love with him. If we easily listen to much noise of whatever its nature, it means that we have one foot in the camp of the other. I remember Father Michael Marr, director of the Marian Movement of Priests, quoting a deceased confrere of his who was a holy father: hell is full of noise. We cannot be in intimacy and a friend of noise. Therefore, it is not indifferent if we have on an instrument of noise or not. Choose the quality of your atmosphere. It already favours intimacy with him. John Paul II, now blessed John Paul II, had this to say on his times with him in adoration and in reclining upon the Lord in the tabernacle. It is pleasant to spend time with him, to lie close to his breast like the beloved disciple, and to feel the infinite love present in his heart. How often, dear brothers and sisters, have I not experienced this and drawn from it strength, consolation and support? And I remember how, even in school days, when still an anti-Catholic evangelical Baptist, I would somehow be drawn to the local Catholic church when getting off the bus or something, because I knew that there was something there. And one does sense it, even as a Protestant, if one is in a state of grace. There's something about the Catholic presence that one does not quite explain. One knows without knowing that they've got something which we haven't got, so they say to themselves but not to each other. And we who have it can't be bothered to drop in to our yet open churches. The devil knows it too. Would you like a story? Would you like a story to make your hair stand on end? Are you sitting comfortably? Then I shall begin. There was a young child, something like yourself, an altar boy, a good while ago, in the Pyrenees in France. And he was living way back in the 17th century. He was brought up well, and while serving at the altar, he felt a call himself to become a priest. So he entered the seminary, went through the process, and was actually quite fervent. He was ordained like the others, and started off well. But he got used to what he was doing. He got familiar, as we say, with the holy things. And he started to rush things. He started also to rush the breviary in such a way that he was saying prayers and not praying. Then he got very busy. That's very modern, isn't it? He was doing a lot of things. And the breviary was, first of all, being postponed, and then bits were being left out and not being recuperated. And then he started to make friends, close friends, with members of the other sex. Very close friends, eventually. And he started to try to get over it by going to confession and getting up again. At the beginning he was doing that, but eventually even that started to be lost in such a way that his immune system collapsed, and he was no longer responding to the pulls of grace, and he was going through the motions. He was actually preaching, sometimes giving coherent messages to his flock, but he was not handling mortal sin. And eventually he became hardened in his heart, and the Lord couldn't get through. Eventually he died, and he had not sorted out his problem. Many years later, in 1975, on the Feast of the Annunciation, a person had to be exorcised with a major exorcism. And it turned out that the soul of this priest, amongst other spirits, was inside this strange case of demon possession. I didn't know this until fairly recently, but that can actually happen. That as well as fallen angels, there can be fallen souls around. And the Lord allowed this to happen for a reason. He wanted us to know in our time what a hugely dangerous thing it is to be ordained. Because a priest can't get away from his responsibility. He has full knowledge that he has the maximum of grace, and he knows what he's doing if he doesn't do it. This priest, through the mercy of God, although he himself didn't make it, wanted us to know. He wanted us to know in particular one issue. The tragedy in his case was that he didn't remain faithful to one thing, which would have brought him back like a magnet. It was the fidelity to the divine office, the breviary. Because if that goes, then one is functioning, and the Lord can't get a word in edgeways. In the exorcism, he speaks, unfortunately, the truth. And this is what he says towards the end, through the person that is possessed. If only I had never lived. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? Judas. Above all, I could wish, if ever I could have lived again and had another chance, to do better. How I wish I were able to do better. How, and this is interesting, I wish I could stay on my knees day and night, praying him above and ask forgiveness. I would call to my aid all the angels and all the saints, so as not to follow once again the road of perdition. And this, by the way, has been recorded on tape, and it becomes very loud at this point. And it goes something like this in the original. But I can't come back. I can't return again. I am damned. And on goes his state to this day, since 1750 or so. Before I conclude, I just want to quote a few other sentences which have come in similar situations and are strangely modern. Strangely, strangely modern. There was a very famous case in Germany around about the same time. The other one actually was slightly later, 1978 or so. This was 1975. It was Anneliese who had offered herself as a victim soul. She was furiously possessed and eventually died under very strange circumstances. The Lord, it seemed, allowed this to happen. She was saved, but this victim's soul was the means by which we could be warned of something else, which I just want to share with you before I finish now. It may help you to see what's going on around, which is not just human, I mean in the church. The spirits in this soul, and they were actually again human spirits, and they have a name, most of them, said quite clearly a few things which one can't say in public, but here perhaps one can, because we have the same intuition. Various things which have come in right now as common practice were of satanic origin. Once a priest, or someone like Judas, who was also an apostle and therefore a bishop, loses his soul, they are so filled with envy and hatred and jealousy for other souls that they can get involved with the devil's own game of trying to ruin the church and to get other souls into the mess as well. Pure hatred. And Judas was in this business, it seems, because he's been obliged to admit, against his will, that yes, they were pushing. They were pushing to get at God through his church. They were pushing to take away God's glory and his rights. And they name specifically certain areas where they pushed hard through powerful people who had influence in the church. Turning the altar to face the people, they were pushing hard in that direction because it brought down God to a human element. man-centered celebration. Communion, standing, getting rid of the altar rails. They were pushing very hard. They admitted themselves, these spirits. Communion in the hand. And this was happening before extraordinary ministers came in, really. Therefore, that's another issue which presumably is parallel. Taking away the sacrality, the sacredness of the priest by not dressing in a different way. They were pushing, pushing, pushing. All this. The rosary. They were pushing through modern priests to make it outmoded because, and they admit themselves, it was a huge weapon against them. Get the rosary out of the hands of the little people. They were pushing and pushing. And now, and by the way, later on in our period, we can see more clearly this. Divide and conquer. The word diabolos, devil, means the one who gets between and divides. They wanted division, and they knew that the Holy Father was the point of union, and therefore they would make it in such a way that it was no longer fashionable to be obedient, and they would make theologians powerful. All this comes out of this powerful series of exorcisms. Does it sound familiar? It sounds very familiar, my friends. I won't stay with it any longer, but we could, if you wanted to, expand it even more, if you want to come on retreat in a fortnight's time, a Eucharistic retreat in Lock on the 21st and 22nd. It is a Eucharistic retreat, therefore we want to make up for what is hurting the wounded heart of Jesus. Just finish with one quote. Just the other day, by chance, I had listened to some music from the 60s, and I was very stirred by one in particular. And I thought to myself, I wonder when a soul gets to the other side and finds he hasn't made it. He doesn't sing to himself, perhaps something like, yesterday, all my troubles seem so far away, and so on. And now they seem as though they're here to stay.